The Gentoo Code, compiled in the late 18th century under British East India Company official Warren Hastings, was presented as a project of enlightenment, aiming to rule Indians according to their own customs. This seemingly benevolent objective masked a strategic colonial agenda. Named after the archaic term Gentu used by Europeans to refer to Hindus, it was more than just a legal document. By codifying and reinterpreting existing customs through a colonial lens, the British sought to create a legal system that served their interests, while appearing to respect indigenous traditions. This manipulation of law and custom had a profound and lasting impact on Indian society, the consequences of which are still felt today. The Gentoo Code was presented as a rediscovery of ancient Hindu jurisprudence, a window into the legal traditions of a bygone era. The texts chosen for inclusion in the code were often selectively chosen and interpreted to suit British interests. The emphasis on ancient Sanskrit texts ignored the dynamic and evolving nature of customary law in India. The British claim of merely codifying existing laws was disingenuous. The very act of codification involved interpretation and reinterpretation. This process, carried out by British officials and their Indian collaborators, was influenced by colonial biases. The result was a legal code that, while claiming to represent ancient Hindu law, was shaped by the political and ideological imperatives of British colonialism. Many communities in India followed customary laws passed down orally through generations. These diverse legal traditions, often varying significantly from Brahmanical interpretations, were largely ignored in the Gentoo Code. The code presented a static and ahistorical view of Indian law, reinforcing the notion of Hindus and Muslims as distinct and separate communities. The compilation of the Gentoo Code was linked to the burgeoning field of Orientalism, the Western academic study of Eastern cultures. Orientalist scholars, while often genuinely interested in studying Asian languages and cultures, also played a crucial role in shaping colonial perceptions of the East. Their work, influenced by prevailing European biases, contributed to the creation of essentialized and often inaccurate representations of Eastern societies. The translation of Sanskrit legal texts, a central aspect of compiling the Gentoo Code, was deeply influenced by Orientalist assumptions. These biases shaped their understanding of Hindu law and influenced the way it was presented in the Gentoo Code. Prior to the colonial period, there was no single codified body of law that applied to all Hindus. The British, influenced by Orientalist ideas about the unchanging nature of Eastern societies, sought to impose a sense of uniformity on this diverse legal landscape. This approach ignored the complexities of Indian society and contributed to the erosion of local legal traditions. One of the most significant legacies of the Gentoo Code was its impact on the caste system. The British, through their codification and interpretation of Hindu law, played a crucial role in solidifying caste distinctions. The Gentoo Code, by emphasizing Brahmanical interpretations of social norms, reinforced the power of upper castes and legitimized the discrimination faced by lower castes. The Code's provisions on inheritance, marriage, and adoption were all interpreted through the lens of caste purity. The British enshrined caste-based discrimination in law, making it difficult for individuals to transcend their assigned social status. This legal sanctioning of caste had a profound impact on Indian society, perpetuating social inequalities that continue to this day. Government jobs, educational opportunities, and even access to basic services were often determined by one's caste. This institutionalized discrimination, rooted in the legal framework established by the Gentoo Code, cemented caste as a defining feature of Indian society. The Gentoo Code was part of a broader colonial strategy of divide and rule, which sought to maintain control over India by exacerbating existing social divisions. By codifying Hindu law separately, the British created a legal dichotomy that reinforced the notion of Hindus and Muslims as distinct and separate communities. This legal separation had significant social and political consequences. It contributed to the growth of communalism as Hindus and Muslims increasingly began to perceive themselves as separate entities with competing interests. This process of communalization laid the groundwork for future conflicts and ultimately contributed to the partition of India in 1947. The British implemented separate personal laws for Hindus and Muslims, governing matters such as marriage, inheritance, and adoption. This legal pluralism further entrenched religious divisions and hindered the development of a shared national identity. This strategy of divide and rule created an atmosphere of mistrust and suspicion between communities, undermining any possibility of a unified resistance to colonial rule. The introduction of the Gentoo Code did not lead to the complete eradication of existing legal systems in India. Instead, it created a complex system of legal pluralism, where different legal systems operated in parallel. The British, while claiming to respect indigenous legal systems, ultimately retained the power to decide which laws applied in which situations. This discretionary power was often exercised arbitrarily, favoring British interests and reinforcing colonial authority. The result was a hybrid system that served to maintain colonial control. The coexistence of different legal systems also led to forum shopping, where litigants would strategically choose the court or legal system most likely to rule in their favor. This practice undermined the legitimacy of the legal system as a whole. The perception of justice as arbitrary and unpredictable further eroded trust in the colonial administration. The Gentoo Code played a crucial role in shaping the development of the judiciary in colonial India. The British established a system of courts tasked with administering both British law and the codified Hindu law, as represented in the Gentoo Code. However, these courts, staffed by British judges and often lacking adequate representation from Indian legal experts, became instruments for the enforcement of colonial policies and the perpetuation of discriminatory practices. British judges, often unfamiliar with the nuances of Indian society and culture, relied heavily on the Gentoo Code as their primary source of information about Hindu law. This reliance on a text that was itself a product of colonial interpretation led to misinterpretations and misapplications of Hindu legal principles. The result was a system of justice that was often perceived as alien and unjust by the very people it was meant to serve. The lack of representation of Indians in the higher echelons of the judiciary further exacerbated the problem. The suppression of traditional dispute resolution mechanisms further alienated Indians from the colonial legal system and eroded trust in its ability to deliver justice. The Gentoo Code, despite being a product of colonial rule, continues to cast a long shadow on modern India. Its influence can be seen in various aspects of Indian law and society, highlighting the enduring legacy of colonial legal manipulation. One of the most significant legacies of the Gentoo Code is its contribution to the continued relevance of personal laws in India. Despite calls for a uniform civil code, matters such as marriage, divorce, inheritance, and adoption continue to be governed by separate personal laws for different religious communities. The Gentoo Code's emphasis on Brahmanical interpretations of Hindu law also continues to impact contemporary debates about social justice. The Code's rigidification of caste hierarchies and its legitimization of discrimination against lower castes continue to resonate in modern India. The hierarchical court system, the adversarial legal process, and even the language of legal discourse all bear the imprint of colonial influence. While India has made significant strides in reforming its legal system, the legacy of the Gentoo Code continues to shape the way law is practiced and perceived in India. The Gentoo Code stands as a stark reminder of the power of law to shape society and perpetuate inequality. Far from being a neutral codification of ancient Hindu law, the Code was a tool of empire, carefully crafted to serve British colonial interests. By manipulating legal traditions, solidifying caste hierarchies, and exacerbating religious divisions, the Gentoo Code played a crucial role in shaping the contours of modern India. Understanding the Gentoo Code's historical context and its enduring legacies is essential for grappling with the challenges facing India today. The Code's impact on issues such as legal pluralism, caste-based discrimination, and communalism continues to be felt, highlighting the need for ongoing efforts to decolonize Indian law and society. Only by confronting the ghost of colonial legal manipulation can India hope to build a more just and equitable society.